people need to be really thoughtful, and advisors need to help people be thoughtful about spending, because once you go to first class, it's very, very hard to go back to coach. It is exceedingly hard. And so we need to be thoughtful about elevations in spending and elevations in lifestyle, because they're very hard to go back from.
Danny, we saw you at the Singe conference in Tampa, and you mystified me. I really enjoyed the time you had, especially when you were talking about your son. So I looked at Wahid and said, we've got to talk to him. I want to hear more. And what I would, instead of talking just for a second not about the soul and money, let's do a little metaphysics first. How did you get so enamored with writing a book about the soul and where it interacts with money?
Well, let's get metaphysical. So I grew up in a religious household. My dad is a financial advisor, and a man who's a big believer. And in the house I grew up in, debt was a 4-letter word, the same way that the other 4-letter words were. And so I grew up with a strong financial foundation and a strong faith foundation. I was a missionary. I was a missionary for 2 years for my church. I lived in Southeast Asia. I speak Filipino better than most white kids from Alabama. So faith,
You may be the only white kid from Alabama that speaks Filipino.
It could be.
Yeah.
So faith has always been part of my journey. But, as a psychologist, too, I just became fascinated and distraught by this disconnect. Our country is about to turn 250 years old next year. When this country was founded, 85% of the world was living in poverty. Now that number's under 9%, and yet we're more depressed, more anxious, more stressed than we ever have been. So there's been this miraculous explosion of wealth, of material wealth, but we haven't been able to, transmute that into well-being. We haven't been able to turn that material wealth into soulful wealth, into metaphysical wealth or felt well-being. And so that is a problem that really fascinates and confounds me a bit.
Yeah. Before we started, we learned that you grew up in Huntsville. I grew up in Nashville, probably 150 miles apart or less. Like you, I grew up in a Southern Baptist household. We had really bad 4-letter words like damn Yankee. And, I did not grow up speaking Filipino. I could barely speak English, right? But I was the first generation off of a dirt floor shack pig farm right outside Nashville, right? Mm-hmm. So I've learned from a friend that in about 100 years, we've gone from every household owning a horse and only the wealthy owning a car to everybody owning a car and only the wealthy owning a horse. So I love the way you phrase that. There's no correlation between our money wealth and our spiritual wealth. It may be even an inverse relationship between the two.
Well, if you look at Christian scripture, it doesn't have a whole lot of good stuff to say about the pursuit of wealth, unless it's to bless the lives of others, right? I mean, it says it's pretty tough, pretty tough if you make money your God. So I don't think there's a huge correlation between spiritual wealth and material wealth. There is some correlation between material wealth and happiness, but even that breaks down at a certain point as well.
Yeah. I grew up that my first story about money was that it was evil. They didn't really make the distinction between, no, Larry, money is not evil. It's the love of money that's evil.
Really?
Right?
Yeah.
So that was a pretty strict upbringing, right? Which to me only creates believer ghettos. If you have no money, you really can't do anything about it. So my father actually did quite well. He became a real estate developer and did quite well. So like you, I grew up around money and understanding that if you were blessed with it, you were also called to do something positive with it, right? Other than just covet more of it. You know, I have been in the room where we were having spiritual conversations with friends, very rational people. And on more than one instance, I've had people say that when they were in a room when a loved one passed away, they felt a sense of the spirit leaving. One even said they thought they could see it. So you define soul as sort of like an emotional or intellectual intensity, which I thought was really unique. But I want to know where you think the soul resides. If that's what it is, where is it?
Well, the soul to me is something unseen but essential. And so when I was writing, I don't know where physically it resides, but to me, that's sort of the essence of the thing. The soul is something unseen but essential. And there's even, look, we're out of my depth a little bit here, but there's even some evidence to suggest that soul has matter. Like when people pass away, they become about 21 grams lighter, right? So there are people who think that, even the soul has materiality and has essence that way. But for me, the soul, in the way that I was writing about it here, it's something unseen but essential. And I was trying to make the case that there's something unseen and essential about wealth in some of the ways that you talked about. And if we're not careful in the ways that we pursue, invest, deploy that wealth, it cannot do all the good that it might otherwise.
I've watched people become extraordinarily rich, but not necessarily more soulful. They don't make the connection between the two. They may say they're spiritual, but you can kind of figure out they don't know what they're saying, and that's just a plug answer that they're using. They make no connection between the intensity that it took to earn the money and the intensity with which they're going to do something with it, or how they got it, or what it means to them, or what it means to other people.
Well, I find anecdotally, that people who become very wealthy, they start to read their own press clippings sometimes. I think a lot of times it's a level of humility and struggle that makes someone the kind of person that can accrue big wealth. But then once they've accrued it, they lose the humility, they lose the sense of the path, they lose the sense of where they've been, they forget about the struggle, and they begin to lean onto the arm of flesh, so to speak. They begin to rely on their own understanding, and they begin to believe in themselves more than they believe in others or something higher or more powerful than them. So I think success can teach people inadvertently that, you're the one that did this. And like one of the things that I was careful to write about in the book was to be cognizant of all of the inputs to a successful life. You had teachers, you had parents, you had, pastors, whoever poured into you, whoever believed in you, mentors who helped build you up. And I think that as people rise through the ranks of financial success, we would do well to remember those people, to continue to thank them, and to continue to send the elevator back down so we don't read our own press clippings and believe our own hype to the point where we lose that sense of where we came from.
Is it that ego fills the room and there's no more space?
I think that is, right? I wrote another book about the 4 biggest behavioral errors that we make. The first and the biggest is ego. The first and the biggest is ego, and it's the granddaddy of them all, because ego tells you that you have nothing to learn. Like, ego is the one that blinds us to all the others, because it tells us you're right where you need to be, you're doing exactly what you need to do, and you have nothing to learn from these people. So yeah, ego rises a lot of times with financial success, and it blinds us to our opportunities for growth and the contribution of other people and other circumstances.
Yeah. if there are there tells that people have when they start to become self-aware about this? They start questioning themselves, like, what do I do with this? What's next? Right? I've made all this money. So is there a point where they become more self-aware?
Yeah, I think a lot of people reach that moment when they arrive at a predetermined goal. A lot of people have a number in their mind that, when I accomplish X or when I hit X number in the bank, that's when I will have arrived. And there's this arrival fallacy that I think a lot of times people have their first taste of the lack of soulful wealth when they reach something big they've been striving for. For me, this was something that I had been working for a long time. It was a good, it was a good pursuit. It was something that I wanted to do to better my mind and better my family's fortunes. But then when I got there, you look in the mirror and you're the same idiot you were yesterday, and you got all the same, you got all the same hangups and all the same questions and all the same misgivings. And so we really have to get better at enjoying the journey and investing our time in places where we can be satisfied. There are there are pursuits in life that sate us, that fill us, that provide us with real lasting satisfaction. There are pursuits in life where we will perpetually move the goalposts. And any kind of professional accolade or financial number is one, it's like drinking salt water. It's never enough. And people can hear that, but I almost think they have to experience it for themselves and then learn to invest their energy in places that are more satisfying.
Yeah. You mentioned that humans are sort of the ultimate slow learners when it comes to realizing this, that we realize what was important right at the point where it's almost too late. Literally, it's a deathbed recognition sometimes that what was important to us, we missed the whole point, right? We thought it was this accumulation, and really it was the journey. Why do you think that is? What is it that's in our makeup that causes us to have the perfect realization, but at the absolute wrong point?
Well, there's a lot of effort put into marketing this bad message. Every commercial you'd ever watch, we're exposed to hundreds and hundreds of commercials on any given day, brand messages, commercials. Every single one of them, the subtext of every single one of those commercials is some variant of, if you spend your money on X, your life will get better. So, we're wrapped up in this sort of capitalist industrial complex that is always trying to sell us something. And it's always sort of ostensibly with the aim of making us happier or making our lives better. Now, some of that is true, but most of it's not. Like if you, buy brand X pizza or beer, it's not going to move the needle on your happiness a whole heck of a lot. Meanwhile, the things that are more fulfilling, things like relationships, things like the pursuit of a higher power, the pursuit of a larger mission, these things are really really difficult to measure. In some ways, like the number in my bank account, it's very easy for me to get my arms around. How much my teenage daughter loves me on any given day is, a little bit more of a moving target. And so people hate uncertainty. And so they spend their time and their effort working on these sort of physical, material, worldly manifestations of success. Whereas things like the relationships or the pursuit of something higher, they're just harder to get your arms around, but they're also weirdly more satiating. So working on that relationship with my daughter is more gratifying, but it's also harder to measure. And so I think a lot of times we fall down on the messages that are all around us and the thing that's easier to sort of stack and count and rank.
Yeah. Is religion failing us? If Madison Avenue is having that much of an effect, Are our churches and our spiritual leaders, are they failing us by not also providing those messages, by at least letting us know that there are resources to go if we have those questions? Why can't people become more fulfilled, or at least find the resources?
So I do think so. This is we'll make a prediction on your show. I do think you're going to see a rebound in sort of formal religiosity, because for the past couple of decades, the fastest growing religion in the U.S. has been what's called the nuns, and that's not like a Catholic nun. That's people who are not atheists, but they are also not identified with any specific religious tradition. So it's sort of people who are vaguely spiritual but not religious. I think you're going to see a return in some measure to more formal organized religion, because I think the things that we're up against right now in terms of the levels of isolation and anxiety and loneliness, I think are reaching a place where people are learning that they need some structure, right? It's good to want to be spiritual, but the average person, I think, needs some parameters around that. And so I hope that I hope and believe that we're going to start to see that in the near future.
Yeah, me too. But help me here a little bit. When somebody says, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual, what do you think they mean by that?
Oh, I think that means they have a sense of things soulful, right? They have a sense of things soulful, but maybe they've been disenfranchised by the way that religion has been weaponized or politicized, or maybe they had a bad experience in their youth. I mean, it could be literally a million things. I assume the best about those folks. I assume that means that they have a sense that there's something out there that's bigger than them. And I think they're right. But they haven't figured out quite the means by which they go and get that. And maybe they feel turned off to some of the formal paths of going to get that. And I mean, look, I understand. Like, I think there's, in many cases, people's cynicism is warranted. And so I hope that we can do better by those folks. And I think that I hope that they can find a path, that balances freedom and structure, because I think there's a lot of people in that boat, maybe even the most people in that boat. And I hope that they can find what they're looking for.
Yeah. Is it possible that people get spirituality and nostalgia confused? They're longing for something better, or what they've heard is better from a previous generation, but they don't know or experience, but they have this internal longing for something. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that we all have that, right? We all have this pining for something larger. Some people call that, God. Some people call that, nostalgia. But I think that, for you, that's a good impulse. I think the impulse that things could be better, that things that could be better than they are today, is an impulse that's worth following and worth working for. And I hope more people will listen to that impulse.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been, Daniel, for 42 years in some form of financial practice, right? As a retail advisor for about 21, 22 years. And I want to go back to something that you said before. People set these goals. And so I live in the goal world. They'll come to me and say, Larry, I have a goal of, I want $2 million to retire on. I think that's my goal, or 4 million or 10 million. And Daniel, what I see is the closer they get to the goal, they just simply move the goal forward, thinking that if 2 million is a good retirement, 4 has got to be better, and better is always better, right? So it's still, even though they're getting older, they're still pegging that happiness on some financial goal.
Yeah.
Right? Very seldom do I hear somebody say, My goal is defined in retirement as spending more time with the kids and grandkids, traveling more, volunteering for the church more, Doctors Without Borders, writing my memoir. It's almost like it's a hard job pulling that out of a client. Yeah, right. And I think that they've never sat down and thought about that definition. It's always been around money. So how can an advisor, how can a friend that's working, their parent, how can a child working with a parent that's about ready to retire help them understand their soul of money a little bit better?
So this very conundrum that you're talking about, I see all the time. In terms of the moving the goalposts, I'm going to give you the fancy term for it, and then we can talk about kind of why we do it. The fancy term for it in psychological circles is the hedonic treadmill. So hedonism is, of course, the pursuit of pleasure. A treadmill, like you run and run, but you never get anywhere. And that's really what these folks are on. They're on a pleasure treadmill where, first it's 2 million, then it's 4. When you get to 4, now it's 10. And there's a couple of reasons why this happens. And I think if we're aware of them, we can do better. One is our spending tends to rise to the level of our income. If tomorrow I had to suddenly begin eating the way that I ate in college, it would be a very hard day for me. It'd be very hard for me to go from, steak and salmon back to Hot Pocket.
Or Vienna sausage, yeah.
Yeah, Vienna sausages, Vienna sausages, ramen, the crinkly ramen. Yeah, so at the time, I didn't think a thing of it because that's kind of where I was at. So eating a bunch of ramen and Hot Pockets and Vienna sausages was sort of my world. Well, my world has shifted now, and it's very hard to go back. So people need to be really thoughtful, and advisors need to help people be thoughtful about spending, because once you go to first class, it's very, very hard to go back to coach. Like once you've tasted first class, it is exceedingly hard to go back to coach. And so we need to be thoughtful about elevations in spending and elevations in lifestyle, because they're very hard to go back from. The other thing is the thing we talked about before, is having a good map for what brings lasting happiness. Most people lack that map. And so they say, well, money, right? Money is probably the thing. In chapter 1 of The Soul of Wealth, I talk about the research into the 5 facets of flourishing. Like when we look at lives of people who are doing really well, people who are joyful and not just happy, they have 5 things that are present in their life. First is they have fun. Money is great at that. Money is great at that. If you want to go visit the grandkids or take your friends to a ball game or eat a fine meal, like that's all fun. And money does a very good job of that. And I think a lot of people over-index on that first of the 5 elements. The second one, though, is deep, meaningful work. People forget that we are made to work. And so a lot of people, my dad is an advisor, and he will tell me that people will come to him at 45 and 50 years old and want to retire. And the conversation he has to have with them is like, look, even if you have enough money, how are you going to spend your days and how are you going to get your need met for work? Because it exists. Even if you don't like your current job, we have a need to be anxiously engaged in a good cause. And that's something we need. The third is the most powerful predictor of flourishing. That's deep relationships. We need to get love and we need to give love. And for men in particular, work is a source of good relationships for men. In particular, women tend to have stronger social networks outside of work. Men tend to have most of their relational ties at work. And so when a man retires after 50 years in the workforce, suddenly his social network declines by 80%. And that's a tough thing, right? The fourth one is one we've talked about a bit today. It's the pursuit of something higher. It's meaning. It's God. It's religion. It's spirituality. It's philanthropy. It's getting outside of yourself and contributing to a cause that's greater than you. And then the final one is advancement. We are wired for growth. We want to be better today than we were yesterday. And so one of the reasons why recent retirees are some of the most depressed people in the country is because they've spent all their time obsessing about that $2 to $4 to $10 million number and no time planning on how they're going to get their work needs met or their social needs or their spiritual needs or their needs for growth, personal improvement and personal growth. And so they arrive at that financial finish line flush with material resources, but without a friend, without a purpose, without a plan for growth. And it's depressing.
Yeah. First, I want to thank you for that explanation because you've given me the perfect permanent loop to run on the screen in our waiting room, right? Because that's the world I deal with every day. And have you noticed that there are hedonistic nuances among the generations? Because I want to come back to something you just said. Okay.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what you've seen in your practice.
Okay. Boomers that we work with are going to retire well. They are. You can run through every analytical permutation, every Monte Carlo simulation, every financial planning software, and show them that money is not their issue in retirement. They cannot outspend their wealth. So my problem is, to use your example, I'm the flight attendant and I'm taking them a first class ticket. They're sitting in coach. I cannot get them to move to first class.
Right.
I cannot get them to upscale their life, to raise their spirit, their soul up to the level that they could easily afford because something is off in their value system. I don't know. It's because if they value money more than they do their experiences. So I don't know what it is, but I can't get them to upgrade. I can't get them to even start giving money to their children early so that they can enjoy the legacy, to watch the legacy, right? To have a living legacy. I can't do it. So also here in Memphis, there is a dominant culture and it's on time, every time. If you grew up in that work culture, that one employer, right? On time, every time. I will agree with you. Men that have spent 35 years at that employer cannot disconnect. They have no spiritual, no social circle, no safety net under them. And that is a brutal retirement when they have to give up their, it used to be they had a company pager and a company cell phone, and they're not Mr. Big Shot anymore, and nobody's calling them, and nobody cares what their opinion is. They're lost children. And sometimes you can see the pain on their wives' face when they realize that this husband, this aggressive, goal-driven boomer is about to spend every day with them now. It's either anger, frustration, or terror sometimes that this guy's going to be home. So that's one of the nuances I see in boomers. Your job is to show me how much I can spend because I am going to spend it. It's time for Felicia and I to enjoy this life, right? The boomer will postpone their calling. They may come to me and say, Larry, I'll ask him, what do you want to do when you retire? I'm going to go back and go to seminary. Oh, that's awesome. Have you already applied? No. When do you intend to apply? Well, and it's always, but millennials, they're like, oh, I've already applied. I've already been accepted. Matter of fact, I just need a check from you because I start tomorrow, right? I don't work with a lot of Gen Z yet, but the few I have worked with, they're like, I'm out at 30 because I'm going to travel. They are much better prepared for the soul of their wealth, the experiential nature of their wealth, than their grandparents are. They want to experience it, right? They're not ready to wait for it. They're out there now, which I used to think that was so different, that was kind of weird, but now I'm kind of applauding them. They may be on their deathbed going, what a great life.
Yeah. I hear this a lot from advisors about boomers and even folks older than boomers. Um, I think it boils down to a couple of things. First, money touches every part of our lives. And for a lot of people, money becomes a huge part of their identity. So that number in the bank account, being the person with $5 million, is everything to them. And it's a signifier of bigger things. It's a signifier of intelligence and hard work and discipline and sacrifice and larger ideals that they probably hold very dear. And if you buy enough first class tickets, you move from being the $5 million man to the $4.2 million man. And while that may be plenty, it may erode your sense of self, and it may erode your sense of ideals. I find what happens with a lot of people is that they too tightly intertwine their self-worth and their net worth. And that net worth becomes a great signifier for things about them that they hold dear and they hold to be fundamental. And I think the only way around that, Stephen Covey talks about the only way around this is to have a yes burning inside of you that's bigger than the no of your fear. There's some fear around, descending from that high plateau. And you've got to have a yes that's bigger, whether it's going to seminary or, being good to the grandkids or naming the hospital wing after you or whatever it may be. I think we as an industry have to help them find the yes, that passionate, soulful yes that's bigger than the no of their fear. But in the meantime, I think if we dig just a little bit, if you scratch the surface, the reason they're reluctant is because those numbers, that net worth, signifies a great deal more to them than just the money in the bank.
So it sounds like it's just a search for a title replacement. I'm no longer founder or CEO. I had a liquidity event, right? Now I have to exchange that title for rich person, because titles are important to me in society. So if I don't have a title, I'm less of a person. It's kind of like what you're suggesting, right?
So I have a very literal example of this. I grew up in North Alabama. I have a mentor there who's, significantly older than me, about 30 years older than me. A great human being, a great philanthropist, and a great businessman, and a great thinker. He's large, he's strong, he's rich. He was in the military. He's just like a man's man and sort of everything we would want, to be or want your son to be. He sold his business for an enormous sum. And then he was suddenly no one in his eyes, right? And he actually got cards made up after he sold his business that said, his name. And then under it, it said former person. And it was this very literal signifier of his felt loss of like he had been a man who captained armies and led large organizations and had overseen great big business deals. And now he was kind of puttering. And I'm pleased to say that he has, in the meantime, found his way. Like, he's started a philanthropic arm. He's done mission work. He's done other things. But there was a time where he was literally, in his mind, a former person, and he had to find that new title. Is it grandpa? Is it seminarian? Is it author, memoir author? Is it philanthropist? It could be something, but people need direction and people need that title and that signifier. And my friend's former person cards will forever be burned in my brain.
Yeah, that's very powerful. It sounds like he came to a point of discernment, right? Where he kind of, maybe it was God, maybe it was himself, but he came to a point where he had to make some decisions and realized where he was. He became self-aware that was his point of true self-awareness. And, you might look in the mirror and go, I don't really like what I'm now seeing, right? So how do I change this? So good for him, right? But why do you think, I've noticed this in my practice, I've been married most of my adult life, and I have a sense that my wife is more soulful about certain things. Why are women more soulful about the money than the men?
So there's a chapter in my new book called Listen to Women, and it talks about how women are the ultimate behavioral investors. Part of its nature and part of its nurture. If we look at how women are wired, women have about, 1/10 the level of testosterone as men. And just even the way that chemically, the way that women are put together, they're less prone to impatience and agitation and anger and some of the things that make men bad investors. We know that markets reward patience and long-termism and thoughtful deliberation, and men are kind of on the whole sort of hot-headed. So women tend to be more patient and more deliberative in the way that they think about money. Then you think about the way that women are rewarded and the way that women are nurtured. I mean, women are nurtured for being more relational and more kind and empathetic and sweet and like all these lovely things. Men are rewarded culturally for being loud and decisive and forceful. And thoughtful allocation of wealth really is sort of favors the ladies. And so I think that women really are, in just about every respect, more soulful. They're better at investing in retail and in professional contexts. And I think at least anecdotally, we see that they're better at relationships. They value the right things at a level that men don't. And I think we have some catching up to do, my friend. I think we gotta learn from the better halves.
Yeah. When I became a retail advisor, one of my mentors pulled me aside and he said, everything you do, spoken or unspoken, revolves around one thing, and that's the woman, right? They are the spiritual head of the household. They are, right? They're the center of the universe. And what a man client may say is that, Larry, your job is, I know that statistically I'm going to pass away first. And I'm first going to judge your competency, your experience, your education, blah, 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 to be my advisor. But unspoken, what I'm really wanting is to make sure that you take care of my wife. And that when I'm gone, I can rest assured that you are going to take care of her. When I've worked with widows, and God has blessed me with an inordinate amount of widows because I was a widower for 10 years. And it's sort of like God says, okay, you know how that feels. So I want you to take care of these ladies. And they have a whole different investment philosophy. You're right. They're more patient. They're less likely to get frustrated with how their money is doing. They're more understanding of what you teach them. And they are faster to allocate money to a percentage to healthcare, which you touched on in the book. You even gave a very specific defined number as to how much, healthcare costs in retirement. I believe it was $319,000, right? But they also understand that they need an allocation to the experiential things that they're going to do with the remainder of their life. Travel with their friends, living legacy with their children and grandchildren. Grandchildren become paramount to them. Not so much building wealth. They're kind of almost horrible wealth builders. But as far as they're champions when it comes to doing something with the wealth that they have, and they just seem like they are more fulfilled than their husbands.
Yeah, so much to say about that. So in terms of you being blessed to work with widows, there's an idea in the literature called the wounded healer. And so we know from the research that people who have been through something are much better at shepherding other people through that same thing. This is true of advisors. This is true of psychotherapists. So the fact that you have 10 years, have 10 years of experience of being a widower yourself, you're more empathetic, you're more thoughtful, you're more locked in and tuned in when you're faced with people in that same situation. So that's absolutely true. You're right. Men are socialized to be, to be killers, to go out and get it, and to be forceful and dominant and go out and get it. And that doesn't always make for good relationships. And men's relationships are de-emphasized. And then I think a lot of men find themselves in a very bad spot in retirement a lot of times, because again, Harvard has done this longitudinal study over what makes, over decades and decades, what makes people's lives happy. Number one is always relationships. Relationships are always number one. And so men ignore relationships or de-emphasize them at their own peril. But yeah, I really think there's something to women understanding not only in the investment piece, but then how to spend it in ways that bless lives and deepen relationships in a special way.
Yeah, you really see men go adrift when they formally retire and their relationships at work are cut, and they find them, they go, wow, they start looking around going, oh my gosh, I don't have any relationships. If somebody were to come and sit down on your couch and say, Daniel, I'm lost. I'm 65 years old. I retired. I'm lost. What would you tell them?
I started the book with that 5-part framework. And, a lot of times, I think, first of all, the reason that framework is so powerful is because it makes something like a joyful life, which feels very hard to get our arms around sometimes. It makes something like that concrete. And what I'll actually have people do is, write life in the middle like it's a wheel, and then just go 0 to 10 on how those different elements of your life are, with the idea that a wheel should roll smoothly. Like, a life well lived has all of these things in equal measure. But what we almost always find is that people are sacrificing one element for another, right? Like their work is getting in the way of their relationships, or their work is getting in the way of their health, or, something like it's usually work getting in the way of other things. And so, figuring out, trying to make that concrete and identifying where the sort of squeaky part of the wheel is, and seeing where they could bring things back into greater balance. I think that's just a simple and practical way to have that conversation in a way that is concrete for people and makes sense to them.
Yeah, but let me tell you, I want to draw on this personally. I'm a boomer. I am. I might be nearing retirement age, but this is a hard exercise. I can't see a day where I'm just going to go to the local McDonald's and talk politics. I can't really see that.
Yeah. In some ways, that's a huge blessing, right? I mean, my dad's an advisor. My dad's will turn 70 next month. No sign of slowing down. I mean, but why would he? He's helping people, he's advancing, he's learning, he's blessing the lives of others. Like, why would he stop? And why would you stop? If you're having a good time, if you're making the world a brighter place, if you're helping people and learning in the process, there's no reason to stop. And I think as longevity becomes, a greater and greater blessing / concern in all of our lives, I think we're going to have to adjust our expectations. So I think working until you're 70 or 80 is going to become more and more the norm as we begin to live very consistently to be 100. For people who aren't having fun, though, and have enough money and still can't retire, I think the conversation is a little different. And I think it goes back to that identity crisis conversation around, okay, this is who you've been, and this is how that built you up and made you feel. Who will you be in retirement, and get those same 5 needs met? But man, for advisors, this job is the sweet spot of being, basically well paid to do work that really blesses lives. And, why would you stop?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that because, your father and I have worked all of our careers to get to this spot. We finally feel confident and competent. It's taken us way more than 10,000 hours to get to this spot, right? If I were to ever write a book, it would really be about how do you pass wisdom down about money to your next generation, right? Because if you may realize that all you've really taught your grandkids is that you get up and you go to work at 7 and you come home at 7 and you do it 6 days a week and then you die. So if you were to write a book, right, about to the boomers and say, how would you start passing on this wisdom? Like, listen, I may have come up focusing too much on money, but let me tell you now that I've reached this point of wisdom, let me start passing this along to you earlier than you might expect it, right? How do they do that? I try to teach people, spend money on your grandkids and go with them so that you can see them enjoy it. Don't wait another 30 years till you're in your 90s and then pass it along. They won't understand it. It's just money to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the tricky things about being an author, and I'll tell you this as a prospective author yourself, one of the tricky things about being an author is that there is an enormous gap between knowing and doing. We think that, writing a book that's full of the right information is going to be the thing that's going to change hearts and minds. It really doesn't. There's a few things that change hearts and minds more powerfully than stats, right? My favorite talking point here is that nurses smoke cigarettes at a much higher rate than the general population. And if you ask any nurse, should you be doing that? Every single one of them would tell you no. And yet, they work long hours, they're underpaid, they're stressed out, that's a bad habit. They're not doing it because they think it's a good idea. They're doing it for other reasons. And the same thing I think is true. Like we can lecture people, we can impart knowledge about money all day long. But there's really 2 ways that we learn more powerfully than that. The first is by observation. If you want to teach subsequent generations a lesson about wealth, the biggest thing you could do is model whatever lesson you want to teach them. Do what you say to do and not just preach at them, right? Model that for them and let them see that change in your life. The second thing is let them experience it themselves. There is actually some science to this idea of faking it until you make it. And, sometimes with your clients who say, look, I want to hoard all this wealth. I don't want to spend it on the grandkids and bless those lives today. I want to, sock it all away. You might have to say, hey, look, go with me on this one, and give them a baby step, right? Like, try this, go down to the beach, go down to 30A or wherever and take a little trip with your grandkids. You pay for everything, bring your camera, come and report back to me. How did that make you feel? I promise it's not going to bankrupt you. And we're going to do this little experiment. So sort of experimenting on the word. That's another way to do it. So lived examples are powerful. Experimenting with new ways of being in small measured ways is powerful. Unfortunately, the written word's not always all that powerful. It's probably third place, but yeah. I still think you should write the book.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you're a dad, right? And if we're going to live on the example of do what I do, not what I say, right? Mm-hmm. What are you teaching your children about money?
What am I teaching? So I'm teaching them the practical realities and the soulful realities. right? So on the practical reality front, the thing that I love when it comes to teaching my kids about money is that, money touches every part of our lives. You don't have to like set up a flip chart and teach them a specific lesson about money, because when I take my kids to the farmers market, probably about 50% of Saturdays we go down to the farmers market. And on a recent trip, I bought some spaghetti sauce from a local, a local entrepreneur. And my son was like, "That's awfully expensive. Like that's way more than it is at Target." And I said, "Yeah, that's a good point. So let's talk about it." And I said, "Look, I want to live in a world where there's a beautiful farmer's market for me to take my 3 kids to. And I want to live in a world where small businesses are supported. And I want to live in a world where we have clean produce in our local area. So yeah, like I'm going to spend double on that spaghetti sauce sometimes because that's what it takes. Because me spending my money on that spaghetti sauce is what makes that world a reality. Like if nobody buys that lady's spaghetti sauce, she stops coming, the farmer's market goes away." Mm-hmm. So I was like, yeah, that's very good. There's a time to be thrifty and there's a time to spend money on things you believe in. When I buy my kids new shoes, I go, okay, these shoes cost $100. This is Nike. Did you know that Nike is a publicly traded stock? Did you know that stock represents partial ownership of an enterprise? What if we had taken this $100 30 years ago and invested it in Nike stock instead of investing it in Jordans? What would that be worth today? Whoa, okay, let's talk about the time value of money. Let's talk about compounding. So money lessons are everywhere if you're looking for them. That's kind of the practical side. On the soulful side, I try to teach them those lessons too. You were at a meeting where I brought my son, right? You were at a meeting where I brought my son to this meeting, and that's expensive for me to do, right? I mean, I travel a lot for work. Work is clearly covering my ticket. They're not covering my kid's ticket,
right?
So it's expensive for me to take my kids around to these speaking engagements I do. But I say, look, this is what it takes for me to be the kind of dad I want to be. My job makes me travel. For me to be a provider and a good dad, this is the compromise. That's soulful wealth to me. Teaching kids about tithing and being charitable. Taking my kids I'm going to take my son to the Philippines this year, with me back to where I was back to where I was a missionary. That boy is about to have his mind blown by, how a large portion of the world lives in a way that it's completely foreign to him. It's good for him to see that. Like, it's good for him to see that and for him to recognize his privilege and his abundance and to understand that not everyone lives the way that he does. So I think there's practical realities and there's soulful realities. And if you have an eye for it, if you're tuned in, they're everywhere. You don't have to work very hard to teach children or grandchildren lessons about money, I think, if you're looking, because they're absolutely everywhere.
Yeah. Tell me a story about when you saw one of your children, when you saw that light go off and you were so proud. It was like, they're getting it. They're there. They got that. They got that, right?
So I will tell you, I'll tell you a story. My youngest is 9 years old. And for a 9-year-old, I mean, a week is an eternity. But we have gotten all of our kids green light cards, and the green light's this little sort of parent controlled debit card system for kids. So you can sort of green light different things. But yeah, we've got them saving, we've got them investing, we've got them tithing, we've got them saving, we've got them all set up. Like, it probably took me longer than it should have to do this. I've been teaching my kids about compounding. I've been teaching them about the time value of money. And we were somewhere recently, we were in Alabama recently, visiting my folks. And we were out with my daughter and my parents, and we were at a Target, and they were looking at toys, and I said, well, hey, do you want to get these Legos or whatever the little toy was? And she said, no. And I was like, okay, well, you have money for it. And she goes, I know, but I'm saving for a house. And, whatever I spend today would be worth a lot more when I'm ready to get a house. And in some ways that's completely crazy. But in other ways, I thought, good for her. She's learning about trade-offs. And look, next week she may buy the Legos. But at that moment in time, she had a notion about the time value of money, about trade-offs, and about the way that having money can get you more money. I think that people don't understand that. I think most of us don't understand that till much later in life, the reality of compounding. So my kids make me proud in a million ways. And incidentally, all three of them are wired very differently with money. Like when, they're much better or worse about saving, same parents, same upbringing, more or less, but very different about money. So I think everyone kind of comes with their own strengths and weaknesses that way.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will step out on a not too long limb and say that the insight that I've gotten from you today, from reading your book, I'm going to say that your children are going to be prolific givers. From what I've learned,
so.
We didn't have enough time to talk about the blessing of giving and giving more to get more. Maybe we can come back and do another one of these one day, but
I'm game.
All right. Thank you, sir. Relationships do mean everything. And just the time with you today has been a real blessing for us and my team. Daniel, thank you so much. You're the best.
No, thank you for your time.
All right, man.